right, good morning, finalists and guests, and welcome to the 2021 Knowledge Mobilization Awards hosted by the ASU Graduate College. Today, we will be celebrating the scholarly achievements and innovations of graduate students and postdoctoral scholars. The KMAs are an opportunity to collectively acknowledge the contributions our scholars have made to use-inspired and socially impactful research. My name is Keith Chandler. I'm the event coordinator for the Graduate College, and I will be acting as the MC for today's presentations. Joining me is Heather Fowland, manager of the Knowledge Mobilization Initiative, who will be introducing our finalists for each of today's sessions. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping items for today's viewers. We will be hosting presentations and panels throughout the entire day, starting at the top of each hour. Today's event is considered very informal. If by chance you have to leave today's event, you can always rejoin at any time using the same link that you have used previously. Our keynote and awards announcement will be starting at 4 p.m. today, featuring Dr. Ronald Beghetto from the Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College. His keynote address is entitled "The Beautiful Risk of Action Forward Research." Also, the chat function and Q&A function are enabled for today's webinar and will be monitored by Heather and myself. If you do have any questions for our finalists and panelists regarding their research, please feel free to submit using either one of those Q&A functions, and we will also get to those questions as soon as we can. At this point, I would like to hand the floor over to Heather to begin facilitating our finalist presentations. Heather, the floor is yours.
Hello all, welcome for joining, or thank you for joining us this morning and welcome. We have three lovely finalists with us for our very first roundtable session of the day. And I'm just going to do brief introductions and then hand the floor over to them to speak about themselves and their research. So first up, we have Alli St. John, who is a master's student in Herberger in the School of Music, Dance, and Theater. And next we have Barbara Quimby, a postdoc scholar in the College of Service and Community Solutions, the College of Public Service and Community Solutions. And last but certainly not least, Steffi Kapsetaki, who is a postdoc scholar with the Biodesign Institute. And with that, I will hand over the floor to the three of you to introduce yourselves and what you're studying and a little bit about your research for us. So do we have any takers for a first volunteer?
I can start, that's fine. Hello, my name is Alli St. John. I am working on my master's in the Theater for Youth and Community program in the Herberger Institute of Design and the Arts in the School of Music, Dance, and Theater. And my research has been about consent and staged intimacy in the high school theater classroom. This is a topic that's been really important to me as a theater educator and as a director of youth theater. I would like to just ask, has anyone ever been in a position where someone in authority has asked you to do something that made you feel uncomfortable or unsafe? I'm seeing some nods, some raised eyebrows. Yeah. So while I've grounded this research in looking at consent-based practices in the classroom, with theater students specifically, these practices are really applicable to any kind of space. So I'd love to share really quickly what I've put together. This research has come from qualitative research with high school theater teachers, with high school theater students. We've done surveys, interviews, focus groups, really getting everyone's ideas and experiences about how they are currently experiencing consent in their theater classrooms and current practices for staging intimacy, and looking at how we can create more equitable practices to honor everybody's autonomy and safety and boundaries. So I've created a quick poster for teachers, just some considerations to keep in mind. So we're thinking about power dynamics, and I've included some quotes from students because part of my research that's been really important to me is really showcasing the voices of students and not centering myself as an educator. So thinking about power dynamics, setting clear expectations, communicating, really focusing on the educational goals. respect for privacy, and community building. And these are like a really broad umbrella topics. But something that I've learned in speaking with teachers is that they want quick and easy resources. So I've made sure that in my product work that what I'm putting out is something that is useful for teachers. I don't want to, write a book if teachers don't want a book. If they want posters for their classrooms, then I'm going to center my work around creating those types of resources that are useful. And yeah, I guess that's what I have to share. Thank you.
That's perfect, Alli. Thank you. Steffi?
Sure, yes, let me share. Okay, should be coming up. Is my video showing up? Is my screen? Can you see my slides? Yeah, okay, great. Should be, okay. Yeah, first of all, thank you to the organizers for organizing this event, and I'm very happy and honored to be among the finalists. So my name is Stefania Kapsetaki. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at Arizona State University at the Biodesign Institute. And today I'll talk about one of my projects and how I kind of mobilize this project in many different ways. So one of my projects is entitled Disease in Spacetime, 1,460 Species Approaching the Tropic of Cancer. And as you might get some idea from the title, this project is all about cancer, habitats, and diets across species. And essentially what I'm trying to see is how does diet and habitat affect different cancer rates across all these species. And this project was among the final 53 from over 900 nominations across 111 countries at the World Science Summit last year for the Science Breakthrough of the year. And this project, together with another project that I'm working on chimerism, also won a poster award at the National Cancer Institute for, it was for the Cancer Systems Biology Consortium. And apart from that, I also tried to kind of mobilize, again, my research by talking in several different places, like at the Ioannina Science Festival in Greece, the Spirit of the Senses Society in Tempe, the Arizona Natural History Museum in Mesa, and other cancer-related conferences. At the University of Copenhagen, at the Coffee at Beyond lectures at ASU, at the Lab Out Loud podcast, the C-Word podcast, which is organized by a team at ASU, the Girl Up Singapore Club, and the UN Foundation. I'm also a co-author of a book chapter that is coming out soon in August on the evolution of multicellularity. I'm also a lecturer at the Lecturers Without Borders, where essentially I'm volunteering to give lectures in schools around the world. I'm a volunteer teacher for Skype Scientist and a co-supervisor of 10 undergrads and grads at ISU. A volunteer at the Open Doors events. I'm sure many people here are volunteering that as well. I've been selected as a STEM mentor for the New York Academy of Sciences, and I'm a demonstrator at the Darwin Day Roadshow, which happens like once every year and organized by Duke University. And something else that you might find a bit strange, but that's kind of what I do sometimes, is I try to mobilize knowledge through art. So these are some of my artworks that won an Emerging Artist Scholarship, and I also exhibit some of these artworks at Michigan University, an online exhibition due to COVID. And last but not least, these are just some comments I wanted to mention that the audience members at the Arizona Natural History Museum kindly shared with me when I presented last year. So that's what I wanted to share with you. Thank you.
Thanks, Steffi. And Barbara, I will give you the floor.
Hi, thank you. And congratulations to Alli and Steffi. You have really incredible projects. I am working here at ASU. I'm a postdoc in the school, I'm postdoc at the Kyle Center for Water Policy at the Morrison Institute. And I'm working on a project called Water for Agriculture. That project is looking at how we can get communities, stakeholders like farmers and vintners and ranchers involved in the process of making decisions about how we manage natural resources like water. That's really important. The more input and kind of participation you have from community members in developing plans can help to build better trust and legitimacy of any kind of scheme that you create. It also really actually helps a lot when you bring scientists and those resource users together and kind of break down the power dynamic, kind of make them more equal. It actually allows the community to inform the science with local knowledge, with kind of their perspective at a very local level that helps to understand the greater system across scales. So our project has been working with communities in the Verde Valley, that's in the central part of the state. And those folks are relying on water from surface water from the Verde River, which happens to be a tributary to the Salt River that brings water to all of us in Phoenix and the greater Phoenix area. So it's a very critical water source for a lot of reasons. It's also a beautiful river, a scenic riverway in the state, and it's a very important conservation site for a lot of endemic species. So with all of those factors coming together, this is an important place to kind of understand how people with different perspectives, conservationists and farmers and developers, how they can find common ground and maybe understand and inform the science that goes behind making decisions about water. So we've been working with community members for about 2 years. I've been helping to facilitate and also, to research, to do kind of the social science side of watching and observing how these meetings are happening and bringing together those stakeholders to discuss the issues, to identify priorities and identify solutions. And one of those solutions has been an online tool that we're building using GIS, which layers different information for farmers to help them make better decisions about water and reduce water use. So overall, I've been very lucky to be situated at the Kyle Center, which allows kind of for a longer term involvement with this community. They know that ASU is going to continue to be there after my project and we'll continue to build those relationships. I've also been working with Dr. Amber Wooditch at the School of Human Evolution and Social Change, and she is really an expert in engaged research that works collaboratively with communities. So in that situation, I've been really lucky to be able to build connections with community members, get their feedback, and really help them, allow them to drive the outcomes of this research, both the theoretical and the practical side too. So that's about it for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Barbara. So for our first discussion point, I know we have two postdocs with us, can put our grad student hats back on and think about how did your program talk about applied research? How did it kind of present that dichotomy between, living in the theoretical side of research and then actually applying what you're learning? And of course, there's always room in there to talk about, maybe the ways that we could have been better supported. But I was kind of interested in seeing across the disciplines how your instructors and mentors and peers kind of first tackled that topic. Oh, Barbara, you're muted.
Sorry, okay. I'll go ahead and I think applied in my context, from the grad school perspective, being from geography, I'm a human geographer by training, and having an applied approach is actually pretty common in our discipline, and especially when we're working between social and environmental issues. It really, so I've always had some encouragement to do applied research, and definitely here at ASU, I think it's very prominent in the research that all of us do. It's to find that connection between the theoretical and kind of what the questions that make us curious and how that really can be applied in the real world.
I can speak from the the theater end of things, as a Master of Fine Arts student, our whole program is really based around working in the field and applying everything we're doing. So there's been a lot of focus in our coursework around, we're doing these qualitative studies, and then we're going to go out into the field and do it and see what happens and try things and work with our community, which has been really exciting for me as someone who's new to all sorts of different research methods. Being sort of thrown in and saying, okay, try it, see what happens, has been really exciting and fruitful. And it's been really exciting to see how much the community I'm working with wants to participate in this type of work.
Yes, an excellent point. Steffi, any thoughts? You do so much outreach with so many different kinds of audiences. When was that instilled in you? Is that something that you have pursued as a grad student as well?
Well, I mean, I think maybe because like from an early age, I suppose, like I didn't mention it, but like I play the piano, like, and I play with my sister. Like I used to play more often, like before the pandemic, in concert halls and all that. I think I've been used to like this exposure with people, so I really enjoy the interaction. And so on any occasion, like I really enjoy talking like with people at museums or just visiting schools. I mean, it's just like fundamental to science, like to share whatever we find, and I think it's really important. But another aspect I was thinking about this applied, I mean, theoretical, I was thinking more like in a research kind of sense. Like I'm thinking like in our group that's working on several aspects of cancer, I'm kind of working more on the theoretical side, like trying to explain the different cancer rates between all these species. And because we have that data, so I'm kind of going back in time, kind of trying to explain why did they get high or low cancer rates. But there are other people like in the team working on like something called adaptive therapy, and it's more kind of applied. They try to treat mice. And I mean, at the end of the day, what we want is like, well, if we understand better the system, the multicellular body and how cancer works, if we can find common patterns across species, it would be like potentially we can find a treatment for many species. Yeah.
Oh, sure. And that's a very big concept to have to translate for people who have all kinds of different exposure to science. Thank you for bringing up the theoretical aspect. So we did have a question from one of our attendees for all of you, which is, what is the most surprising thing that you've learned during your research project? And I'll just poke in for a second to let our attendees know that all three of our finalists, their research is still in progress. So any thoughts? What's the most surprising thing that you've run into so far?
Shall I say?
Yeah, absolutely.
Just yesterday, essentially I'm looking at the diet of different animals, and I started looking in the literature, what's their primary diet in the wild. But we have cancer data from zoos. So only just a few days ago, I started looking at the diet of these species in the zoos, and I didn't know that, what was it? Ferrets, they give ferrets cat food. Like, it's completely different to what I would think. Some of the wolves, dog food. So essentially, like, I mean, I didn't know at all how zoos work, but apparently, like, there's so many restrictions because, I mean, there's lots of kind of interactions with certain, like, people complaining about how people handle animals in the zoo. So there's very tight regulations about the kind of diet. And anyway, I thought it would be like the diet would be much more like, well, similar to the wild, but it seems very humanized, and it makes me think of the effect of fast food on diet, and like, you know, and how people like obesity and all these different questions. It's so interesting. It's taken me to different directions.
Very, very interesting.
I'll say there's maybe two interesting things I've learned. One is that we grow pecans in Arizona. I didn't know that, but they're having a Pecan Festival this weekend up in the Verde Valley, if you're interested. And the other thing is that you can actually get farmers on Zoom to talk about water issues. You know, we've had to do a year of research in these stakeholder meetings, mostly on Zoom, and you know, having 12 or 15 folks willing to dial in from their farm. Sometimes I think we've had at least 2 interruptions from chickens during that time, during those calls. So, you know, and hearing, you know, cows and sheep in the background, but, you know, their willingness to participate really speaks to how important these issues are to local communities and why we shouldn't neglect their voices.
That's an excellent point. Once we move out of the city centers, internet infrastructure in particular, it can be a little spotty. But I think you're right. It speaks to the importance of the issues, and it's always charming when a Zoom meeting gets interrupted by our farms.
Definitely.
Alli?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of something. I mean, all of it has been really like surprising and exciting. I'm thinking about like in the theater community, we have a tendency to share horror stories, like what went wrong with your show and how did you fix it, or a terrible thing that happened to you in class, or oh, did you have this terrible teacher or whatever. And we hear these terrible stories, and we like to think that as we evolve over time, some of these poor practices start to fade away, right? We start to think like, okay, maybe I shouldn't treat students this way, or things like that. But some of the stories that I've been hearing, I'm like, oh no, why are teachers doing this? And on one hand, it's, oh, that really hurts my heart. But on the other hand, it really shows like why this work is important. And it's really exciting to see like how much people want to be doing it. So that's been really surprising to me in some ways and exciting in others. But yeah, and just like hearing from so many different people and hearing different stories and different needs that people have around this work is cool.
I know oftentimes when we're thinking about things that have happened that make us uncomfortable, we can also use things like humor to deflect that a little bit. Did you run into that doing your research?
Yeah, I find that people use humor to deflect, or there's a lot of like, but it's no big deal, or I'm fine, and I think there's a lot of like not recognizing trauma, and a lot of this work is looking at like not re-traumatizing and recognizing boundaries and safety issues emotionally and physically. So yeah, I see a lot of the humor deflecting, or the self-deprecation, or just sort of like brushing it off like it's no big deal.
Sure. So we have another question for all three of you. How do you or have you worked to juggle your research processes with your personal investment or interest in your subject? And the person is particularly asking how you remain unbiased when you're out working with different audiences and different collaborators in the field. Or do you remain unbiased?
I think that's really hard because as a theater educator and like a theater director, I'm working directly with a population of students that I work with outside of my research. But I think by grounding it in the voices of the youth and not in myself and my own narrative, that's helped me remain unbiased and really focus on what they have to say and not what I perceive.
Perfect. Thank you, Alli.
Should I? Oh.
Go ahead, Steffi.
Yeah, I was thinking, yeah, bias, it's really, I mean, even the choice of our research project is somewhat biased because it's kind of based on our previous history or our preferences throughout our lives. So just a research project, what we choose in a sense is always going to be biased. I mean, just by the fact that we chose to do that. But like, for example, in my case, when I study cancer, diet and habitat, I've noticed that, well, maybe I'm interested in diet because my mother used to be a nutritionist. Well, I grew up in Crete where we used to have like olive trees, and I used to be all around the fields. Yeah, and on the other hand, like when I'm doing the actual research, the way I overcome these things is essentially, well, interacting with people in meetings and listening to different opinions and going thoroughly through the literature. So it's, one has to realize the biases, and based on the fact, I mean, just the fact that we realize the biases is a starting point, and that allows us to kind of explore what we don't know in the literature, essentially. Yeah.
Yeah, I think exploring bias is always a really important part of research with communities. Both the bias you may bring in that might be excluding people you're allowing to participate in your research, and also maybe your bias in your preference in the outcome of your research. So I think being reflexive and thinking about that is an important part throughout the process. For me, like others, I do have a personal connection in a way. I have an uncle who's a farmer, and he's been telling me for years that, people don't listen to us. We know more about the land than anybody. We live on it, and it's part of who we are. And so that's always in the back of my mind when I'm talking to these farmers. But in some ways, I hope that helps to open my perspective, because I'm also come from a kind of science background where you have a more I guess a more critical and objective perspective on what knowledge is and what is happening in biological systems. So I'm kind of trying to bring those together. And so, yeah, I do have to think about my bias on both of those sides in the data I'm collecting, and making sure that the voices of the people who are participating are the ones that are in my research, and not my opinions or anything like that. But fortunately, just thinking about that as I'm doing the process really, I think helps to reduce, maybe not eliminate, but reduce that bias.
Sure. And to bridge off of, I think all three of you mentioned the populations or collaborators that you're working with. We had another question about how did you approach them? Or how did you start building those relationships? Did you have an in, or were you starting from scratch? What was that first step?
I really relied on snowballing. Which means I found people that I knew and then asked them to pass it along to other people that they know. So social media was a really great tool to put out calls for interviews, or to post my survey and say, share this within your circles. And so my first survey that I did in my first semester of graduate school, which feels so long ago, I had 35 high school theater teachers participate, and I think I personally knew maybe 5 of them. So through snowballing, I was able to get a decent sample size.
Yeah, in my research, I was lucky that it had already kind of been established. I'm part of a multi-site USDA funded project, and before I came on, there was actually work already done to reach out to the community, to initiate kind of those connections and build some relationships. So some of that was already there, but I also kind of came in a little when folks had already made their connections. So I had to start building those relationships, mostly on Zoom, which is also its own challenge. And I'm not from Arizona, I'm from California originally. The Verde Valley is a new area to me. I had to really learn about the culture and the place remotely with only just 1 or 2 visits to the area to get to know the people and the context. So yeah, I think I had some advantages with having kind of the ASU connection with the community already there, but my personal connection I've had to work to nurture there, mostly through phone calls and trying to connect one-on-one with some of the participants and check in with them. But yeah, that's definitely been an interesting part of it.
Yes, for me, like I remember when when I was finishing my PhD in the UK, I was, well, looking all over the place for postdoctoral positions. There was somebody in Cambridge, Elizabeth Murchison, who was working on transmissible cancers. And I was really interested in that. She was working on dogs and Tasmanian devils. And then we had lots of discussions. I visited her group. And then gradually at some point she recommended this group in Arizona. You should look at that. And I read more about it. It was the Arizona Cancer and Evolution Center. And again, I started learning more about it, and it was I realized that this was a very good match for me, because in my PhD work, I had worked on the evolution of multicellularity. So it's lots of evolutionary background. And here at Arizona, they already have that, but they also look at cancer as well, which I didn't have in my PhD. And so it was an easy transition. And I remember my first interview was essentially something like this. I was on Zoom, which was really strange for me, like from the other side of the continent. My family was scared, what am I going to do and escape and all that. So, but anyway, it's been a really great journey so far.
I think you all raised kind of the interesting point, especially you, Barbara, about being the caretakers of the relationships that you develop. So I know Barbara mentioned that she's part of a longitudinal study that will continue after her research is done. I was wondering, for you, Alli, and for you, Steffi, how you've been thinking about taking care of those relationships and sustaining those relationships, once your research is published.
Should I? Yeah. Like for me, it's my second year as postdoc, so I'm already trying to already working on lots of different projects, and building collaborations with other people, like from other universities. So I'm making sure I'm kind of still in, and all these people at other universities are still part of this, like ACE, Arizona Cancer and Evolution Center. So it's a huge collaboration, and I'm kind of, through constant meetings and all these things, we keep in touch. Although at the moment I'm in Greece, waiting for my vaccination, waiting to come back to ASU. It's essentially, taking care of like all these constant meetings and just keeping in touch with everybody and all these different projects we're working on.
Yeah, I think this is such a great question, because another aspect of the work that I'm doing is looking at care and generosity. And so some of the ways that I've implemented that into my research protocol is, everything's optional. Everything is opt-in. I'm not asking you to share things that you're uncomfortable sharing. If you don't want to answer one of the interview questions or one of the survey questions, you don't have to. And because I'm looking at such a wide population of people, it's really been an open door policy sort of thing. Like, if you want to continue this conversation with me, I'm more than happy to do that. I would love to do that. But because there are so many people involved in this research, I haven't fostered like one-on-one relationships with a lot of participants. But what has been really cool is seeing the people who are excited by their participation in what I'm doing and wanting follow-up. Like, I'd love to see what this looks like when you're done writing it, or I want to continue this conversation somewhere else. So that's been really fun.
Yes, that's an excellent point. We close the feedback loop by making sure that we share what we learn with all of the people who have helped us discover it. So I think we have time for just about one more question. What advice would the three of you give to a graduate student who's never done research like this before, but is really interested in stepping outside of the university and making some real world collaborations? What advice would you give to them?
Do you mean like in terms of, do you mean in terms
of? Not meant to be a gotcha
like...
question. Here, how about this? What advice do you wish you had gotten the first time that you kind of stepped into this applied researcher world? Or it could be advice that you got that you think would be valuable to pass along.
I think I'll go ahead and try and answer a little bit. I mean, that's a really, I think it's a really good question, and it's maybe stumping us a little bit just because there are so many things to think about. And I think one of the keys for me in doing applied research and doing community-based research is to really understand you know, how you fit into that community. What's your position in relation to that community? If you're working with a community who is maybe it's a disadvantaged community, maybe it's you know, a Black or Indigenous community that you're not a part of, that I'm, you know, if I'm doing research, to understand that that there may be research questions that you know, that aren't going to be as easy for you to answer, and that, you know, maybe make sure that the questions that you're asking are relevant and important and meaningful to the community that you're working with, and to partner with people who can, you know, maybe if you aren't a part of that community that you want to study, make sure that you have partners who are part of that community who can lend their voice and build connections. So you know, maybe even take a more supporting role in that research.
That's an excellent point, especially in the social sciences. I think that there are a lot of research questions that we can't truthfully answer without a lot of buy-in from the community that we're working in.
Yeah, I'd love to just echo what Barbara is saying. All of that has been really critical to how I've approached this work. And I think specifically positionality and power have been things that I've been keeping in mind a lot, especially as I'm working with vulnerable populations of people. You know, who am I to them, and what unconscious expectations am I putting on them, and making sure that like it is truly like an equal balance, and nobody's being pressured to, you know, please the grown up or the fancy researcher, you know, right? Like I want to make sure everyone is comfortable and wanting to be in this space. So the other thing that I would share is to keep in mind that this is long work. When I started this in my first semester, I had no idea that I would be continuing this work through my entire graduate studies, and how much it would inform my thesis work. There's a lot to do. There's so much more than I thought, and especially with you know, the qualitative work, there's more and more and more, and everyone has stories to share, and there's always more information. So it's long, hard, and rewarding work.
I mean, I wanted to add something about, mostly say, if somebody wants to go and do research and present in a museum, or if they're talking to high school students, that's been very strange for me because I didn't have an experience before in that. And only recently I realized that, well, we have to be silent more than we think. So like we don't have to give the answers immediately. Like we have to ask more than give the answers, like especially like in high schools where they're often, most of the cases, I remember a few weeks ago I had a Zoom meeting in a classroom, and everybody was like so shy that nobody was answering any of the questions. So I mean what I learned is essentially give them time and give them a pathway so that they find the answer. Don't give the answer immediately. And so I've kind of learned I have to listen more and give them a chance to speak than just constantly like show off what I found, or not show off, but essentially blah, 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 without thinking that they need to have a chance to like process it and find the answers themselves. Yeah.
I agree, Stephanie. I was an undergrad anthropology major, and I still don't think that point, the researcher as a listener, really got through to me until, you know, I was out in the field. Well, I will, our time is up, but if the three of you have any parting thoughts, of course, you are welcome to the floor, and thank you all for joining us, and congratulations.
No, thank you. It's an honor.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you
Perfect.
so much.
Thank you all for your time and your very thoughtful responses. And we'll see you all this afternoon. For all our attendees, we're just going to put up a background slide really quickly. Like Keith said, the link is live all day, so you're welcome to stay, but we will be coming back together at 11.